Okay, so today I'm going to try and talk a little bit about securing your RESTful services. Now, I'm not a security expert, so it's not so don't take everything I say as the gospel. I will show what I've learned so far, and what I've hacked through and sort of could gather. So now I created here, you'll see my previous tutorial how to create a Spring service, a RESTful service. So I have a little class called employee, and it's got a ID, a name, and a salary. Those are the things. Then it's really just 4 files. Then the web XML, I show that in my previous tutorial, and then the RESTful service, very small file, and then the actual service, which maps to /employee, and this guy, when it starts up, it just generates 10 guys with a employee and a name and a salary, just random, creating a random value. And then I expose a few things and show everything that a RESTful service can do, meaning a get, and that would be a read. And I have 2 reads, a HTML list and a list. I'll show that now again. There's a get a specific employee, then there's a put, and that's typically an update. So that's how you update the employee. And then I got a delete, to delete the employee, find the employee and delete them. And then I got a post, which is adding. So add, delete, update, and read or get. So those are all the functions in there. I have a previous tutorial that covers this in a little bit more detail. But how that then translates, if you look at this service at a on the website level, and I'll do this through a RESTful client, and again, there's the list. If I were to display it and render it HTML, there it is. So or if I were to go and fetch employee number 1, there's his details, and that's nicely rendered in here. So but again, then client starts or people starts abusing my little service I have there on the internet, and I can't have everybody see what the salaries are. I can't have them. This is like protected information, so now I have to protect it. So I'm going to show two ways in this, and I don't know if it'll take me 1 or 2 videos at this stage, but what I'm going to try and do is show basic authentication first, and then show OAUTH, implicit OAUTH it's called, on the second part. So we sort of end up with something like this, the 2 authentication methods. So if you were to here just go and say this is my service, and of course your service behind that is can be a database or something like that. So so here's a DB, and so of course this guy talks to that guy, but out here you have your client. So that's typically how these things work. The client talks to your service, you talk to your database, but inside this database now you got data, and so out here is the bad client, and he starts using your service, and you don't want him to use it. And I mean, without any security, there's no way of stopping this guy. I mean, he's just going to continue to use it. So the first thing we're going to do is try and implement basic authentication. So basic authentication is really simple, and what it requires then is this guy, when he sends his transaction, he needs to send in a username and password, something to that effect. So for him to do a transaction, he needs a username and password. This guy is gonna add username plus password. So he's gonna send in a bad username and password. So then, of course, you can stop the guy, and he can do no longer transactions. So the first one we're going to look then is a basic authentication. Okay, so that one is pretty nice, and but it has some disadvantages, and in the second part we'll look at the second part. Authentication, I can't spell for the life of me, but in any case, so in the second part we're going to look at using OAuth implicit to protect the service. So in this guy, every request he's going to make, he's going to send in a username and a password. This guy is going to authenticate the username and a password, and if he does, he's going to fetch the data from a database and return back, and that's what we see here. So if we go back to our service, I call for a list, I get it. If I want to see just employee number 8, I ask just for employee number 8, and there's employee number 8's details. Now let's go and secure this so that you can't just request it with a GET, you also have to send in a username and a password. Okay, so adding this basic authentication is very simple. We're actually not going to even make changes to our service class or our database. This is not something that happens there. This is sort of a layer that lives above our service. So if we were to look at that, we're going to add something here, and because we're using Spring, we're going to add to this security layer, we're just going to add a XML file for the configuration, and we're going to add a make modifications to our web.xml. First of all, we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this file, let's call it REST dispatcher servlet security.xml. So REST dispatcher servlet, that's our original, but we add this security onto it. So inside that file we're going to put a few details, and this detail is not a lot of detail, but it really and sorry, it's warning me that I need to add these filters, which we'll do now. But there's a security section in here, and I'm going to say there's a customer, and here's a username of Verve and a password of 123, and I'm going to apply this pattern to from the root forwards everything. So I could have just applied a certain pattern, like slash list, so you can only get the list in this fashion. But I'm actually going to say, well, you can get everything. Okay, the other reason that this guy is complaining, of course, is I need to still install the security libraries, Spring Security, which we'll do in a second over here. So that's the first file. The second file is our web.xml, and that currently it's a very simple type file, but we're going to update that slightly, and we're going to make that look a little bit more like this. So currently we'll just say our REST dispatcher really dispatches everything from root. So we're going to add and say there's a new thing. There's still a REST dispatcher, but and so this part stays the same, but we've added a few things. So we added this Spring Security filter chain that serves everything from a root forwards. There's our security filter, there's our classes, and then here we're going to say, well, there's two contexts that I need you to include. I need you to include in our web-in file, I need you to include my servlet, and I need you to include my security. So those are the two basic include files for this. And now again, of course, in security, I now need to add this these libraries. So let's before this will work, let's go try and add the libraries. But that's about it. That's the whole to do to implement to implement this. It really is only a change to your web.xml to include those two files, and then creating this new security and defining, you know, that there's such a person. So let's go add the library quickly, and we go into file and we go to project structure. Let me minimize that a little. That's it. So I'm gonna from libraries to then pull this from Maven, and I will pull let's say Spring security, Spring dash security dash core, and let's see if we can get that one. So it's searching, Maven searching, and see what it finds. I'm gonna install 3.2.3 over here. Let's just take that one, Spring Security Core. I'm gonna install it. I'm gonna say add it to that service, but you'll see, you know, it of course pulls a lot of other thing with it, but you know, there's the main guy we're looking for, spring.security, and then it says, you know, you had to add these to your little war files. So, you know, there's Spring Security Core implemented or installed as a library. I'm going to go to project structure. I'm going to add another one from Maven. I'm going to add spring.security.web, spring dash security slash web. To the actual deployment. There they are, and by now, after I've imported all of these configurations are now valid. So the basic thing I've thus done, I've made no changes to my employee class, which is what I'm exposing, and you know, my object. I've made no changes here to my actual service, you know, that reads and replies. I made a change to the web.xml, and I added these two configuration files, and I've added the security filter chain, and then I created this security file, and I've defined one in here. Now this could have been a something else, you know. At the moment, over here is a config file that we use for that, but this could have been, there's implementations for a database, there's implementations for a LDAP, and there's even implementations of your own, meaning you talk to whatever you want. So you could have created many other ways over here for where your actual authentication or your your basic authentication lives, or the credentials and that kind of detail. So you could have created something. I'm just going to use the config file for now, and in this config file I created this username, verb, and password 123. So if we were to run the service now, after I've added those two files, modified the web.xml and added this servlet security, I'm gonna now oops, I'm running into an error over here, and I'm gonna have to see what that is first. Hold this. Oh, I'm missing a library. There's a library missing. Okay, let me resolve that quickly. But I'm going to remove all these duplicate libraries. So if I go into like Spring Security ACL, I really just need this top part. I don't need all of these guys. So I'm going to go to this guy. I'm going to remove all of that stuff. We already have all of that installed. So for here I'm going to remove all of that, and for here I'm going to remove all of that, and I'm really just going to end up with the core libraries. Let's quickly see then also in our artifacts. Let's go see if we include these guys. I'm going to include them in the build. I'm going to include all of these artifacts in the build, so they're all included now, so that they're part of a runtime of a artifact build. So let's see if we can get this running now. Well, there it is. It's now starting up clean. It doesn't have all those duplicate libraries. First of all, what you saw is from my website. Now suddenly there's a prompt for a username and a password. So if you were to look at this from a client, if I try and send a request, it's going to come back and say this request requires authentication. You're now suddenly working with authentication, a class that needs to happen, or authentication method that needs to happen. So you can in a tool like this, you can use basic authentication. So you can say send in verb and password 123, so if I now actually do that request, you'll see that it's successful. So what this really does is it's going to put in the header, it's going to put a authorization header with the word basic and then that value. So you could have created that by adding a header field and calling that header field authorization. Let's just call that header field authorization, and then putting in the word basic as a value, and this is a base 64 encoded. And what this really says is verb : 123. So if you were to go here, and I'm going to remove it from here, so I'm actually going to send it as a real header, and you see the result is the same. If I were to mess with this value, then all of a sudden I wouldn't get the result anymore, because this authentication value here is no longer correct. So so this is a base 64 encoded a string. So you can go anywhere to create that. Let's create a little class over here. We can just run it, and I'll show you the base 64 encoding. So I'm just gonna new package. I'm just gonna do test or whatever, and I'm going to create a new class in there called base test base 64 test. So let me just create that quickly. Hold on a second. Okay, so I just quickly created this little class called base64 test Java void main, and I'm just using the sun miss base encoder. So to prove, there's viv123, that's the actual a text that we want to encode. If we run it, here's the result. So that's the encoded text, that viv123. So I can take that and I can go into my little service, my little request over here, and I can say, well, add that basic over there, and there it's working. I'm that to my authorization header, so I'm sending basic. So I can go run. I will stop this. So to just prove it, I will go back into my little security servlet here, and I'm going to say no, it should be admin and the password should be password. So I'm going to just quickly run my service again. This time it will be admin and password. So when that starts up, again, if you try to hit it, of course with a web server now, you'll get that. But through my little client over here, I'm going to try and authenticate, and it's going to say, hey, bad username or password, bad credentials. So I can now immediately just go to my little thing here, and we said, what would the encoded string for admin and the word password be? Admin : password. So if I were to run that, the result would be, that would be the string, the actual base64 encoded string. So if I go to my little client over here and I go in here, I will say, well, there we go, that's a new string, the new username password, and there we go. So that's it, basic authentication implemented. We thus have a config file here, and this guy is going to try with an invalid username password, or he doesn't have this username password, but and so he can't use the service. The service is configured in this config file, but it could have been your own or a database or LDAP or whatever, and that sits sort of in front of a service. These two files you created, you may modify the web.xml, and you created the security file. That sort of sits in front of those services now, sits in front of your actual service, and says, hang on, before you can get there, you must need to send me a username and a password. The bad thing about this is, with every transaction, there's this piece of information that's sent in the header. So you would want to send that, there's your actual request. You would probably want to send this via something, SSL, because anybody can sniff this and they get this detail, and then they have your username and password. Even though you base64 encode it, it's not encrypted. It's just anybody can base64 decode it, like I showed you in a little application. Anybody that gets that string can decode it back to this value, and they'll have your username and password. So you would want to make sure that at least this transport over here is over SSL, so that you're safe. And but yep, that's the first one, and the next one I'll do the OAuth implementation.